People say you never forget your 15th birthday, but for Liam it would become a date carved so deep into his memory it would haunt his dreams for years. He'd barely even woken up that morning before Vera was at his bedroom door, cheerful, syrupy sweet, with that weird smile she wore whenever she wanted something. Liam's heart sank the second he saw her. Something was off. "Get up, birthday boy. I have a special surprise for you," she called, the forced excitement in her voice almost painful to hear. The sun wasn't even high enough to peek through his dusty blinds, but Vera was already bouncing on the balls of her feet like it was Christmas morning. Liam rolled out of bed, running his hand through tangled hair, his mind drifting back to his father. How birthdays used to mean pancakes and laughter, the two of them slinging whipped cream at each other in the kitchen. Everything had changed when his dad died. Vera moved in, and Joy moved out. He dragged himself through the motions, slipping into worn jeans and pulling on a faded hoodie, all while Vera hustled him along. She insisted he skip breakfast, promising they'd eat something amazing out in the wild. He noticed she was dressed too fancy for a hike, her nails freshly painted, sunglasses perched on her head, even though the sky outside was a bruised purple. They drove in silence, past the outskirts of town and the sagging fence lines that marked the edge of the world Liam knew. Vera hummed tunelessly as the miles slipped by, her fingers tapping the steering wheel. Every so often she'd glance at him, eyes narrowing in the rearview mirror, then flick away like she'd touched a hot stove. He tried not to squirm. There was something about the way she kept smiling, too wide and too long, that made his skin itch. By the time they reached the New Mexico desert, Liam's stomach felt like a fist. The canyon stretched out before them, red rock and jagged cliffs glowing under the morning sun. The air was dry and sharp, tasting of dust and secrets. Vera parked on a dirt turnout, cutting the engine with a snap. "Come on, Liam, let's make a memory," she said, grabbing a small day pack and ushering him toward the edge of the canyon. He followed, boots scuffing the gravel, feeling every step pull him farther from safety. Vera chattered about adventure and becoming a man, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Liam kept glancing back at the car, half hoping she'd laugh and call the whole thing off, but she just kept marching. When they reached a narrow overlook, Vera pointed down. "Look at that, Liam. You see that old branch down there? Run and grab it for me, will you? It'll make a great walking stick, and you'll have proof you were braver than your old man." Liam peered over the edge. A scrubby branch jutted from the slope, maybe 20 feet down, a stupid prize for a dangerous climb. He hesitated, sensing the warning in his gut. "Vera, I don't think—" "Oh, for heaven's sake, just do it. Or are you going to spend your life being afraid of everything?" Her voice lashed out, cold and sharp, the smile gone now. Swallowing hard, Liam slid down the loose gravel, each movement sending tiny rocks tumbling into the abyss below. He reached for the branch, sweat stinging his eyes, when suddenly he heard the crunch of footsteps behind him. He looked up. Vara was standing above, eyes hard, lips pressed thin. She didn't look like a worried parent. She looked like someone about to shut a door. "Vera, I got it," he called, hoisting the branch, trying to force a smile. But she didn't smile back. Instead, she took a step closer, then another. For a split second, Liam saw regret flicker across her face. Then her hand shot out, shoving him hard in the chest. He tumbled. The world turned to sand and noise and pain as he crashed down the rocky slope. Branches tore at his arms. Stones gouged his back. He landed hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. All he could do was stare up at the sky, gasping for breath, while dust settled around him like a shroud. Above, Vera's silhouette hovered for a moment. He tried to call her name, but the words stuck in his throat. She turned away, her footsteps receding, the car door slamming shut in the distance. Then nothing but silence. Liam blinked, tasting blood. His right ankle screamed with pain. When he tried to move, white-hot agony shot up his leg. Tears stung his eyes, but he forced them back. He couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. He reached for his phone, only to find his pockets empty. Vera had insisted he travel light that morning. He bit back a sob, clutching his side, fighting off the dizziness that threatened to swallow him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something moving. A slithering, sinuous form, brown and diamond-patterned, emerged from the rocks. The rattlesnake coiled, tongue flicking, eyes fixed on him. Liam tried to scramble away, but the pain in his leg held him fast. The snake struck before he could scream, its fangs sinking into his calf. Fire tore through his veins. He kicked at the snake, desperate, but it slithered away, vanishing into the crevice as quickly as it had appeared. Dizzy, sweating, and shaking, Liam dragged himself toward a small, shadowed gap in the rocks. He didn't know why. Just some primal urge to hide, to find shelter. Each inch felt like a mile. He collapsed inside the crevice, head spinning, heart pounding out a ragged beat. He thought about his father, about the kitchen and the pancakes, and about how cold Vera's eyes had looked above the canyon. He wondered if anyone would ever find him. Just as the darkness began to close in, a shape appeared through the swirling dust. A white Mustang, wild and magnificent, amber eyes glowing in the morning light. Liam stared, unsure if he was dreaming. The horse stomped its hooves, rearing back as if to challenge the world itself. Then, with a fierce cry, it charged at the rocks where the rattlesnake had vanished, trampling the ground with such force that Liam could feel it through the earth. The Mustang circled back, lowering its head beside him, its breath warm and steady. Liam's vision blurred. He reached out, fingers brushing the horse's muzzle. "Are you real?" he whispered, barely conscious. The Mustang, Storm, stood sentinel over him, eyes never leaving the boy as the sun climbed higher. Liam slipped into unconsciousness. The last thing he saw, a mane of white and a pair of watchful, unwavering amber eyes. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. At dawn, the desert feels like another world. Quiet, cold, painted in ghostly blue and gold. A thin mist hovers above the sand and sagebrush. Somewhere out there, between the silent cliffs and dry riverbeds, something wild is crying for help. Grace had been up for hours, as usual. She always woke before Eleanor, sitting with coffee on the back porch of Hope Hollow and listening to the world breathe. She'd spent her life with animals, horses mostly, but plenty of broken people too. And she knew the difference between an ordinary dawn and one that promised trouble. On this particular morning, Grace's coffee sat forgotten on the porch rail as she listened to the wind shift. That was when she heard it. A distant, frantic whinny, sharp and insistent, rising and falling like a siren. It wasn't the sound of a horse calling for its herd. It was the sound of desperation. She set her mug down, slid into her boots, and whistled for Sadie, her old cattle dog, who was already waiting at the door. "Come on, girl. Someone needs us." The two of them crossed the paddock and climbed into Grace's battered pickup. As she drove, the sound grew louder, urgent, and impossible to ignore. The land around Hope Hollow was a patchwork of scrub and canyon, full of old trails and new scars. Grace followed the cries, bouncing along rutted tracks, her heart pounding with that familiar mix of dread and hope. She'd rescued more animals than she could count over the years. Runaways, strays, creatures abandoned by people who'd lost their way. But this sounded different. When she reached the ravine, Grace stopped dead in her tracks. There, halfway down a rocky slope, stood a wild Mustang, white as bone, mane tangled and eyes fierce. The horse's sides heaved as he stomped and spun, whinnying so loud it echoed off the stone. Blocking the path behind him was a tangle of broken branches, and just beyond, Grace caught a flash of something, a scrap of denim, a motionless leg, an outstretched hand. "Easy, boy," Grace called softly, her voice calm but trembling. "I'm here to help." The Mustang spun to face her, hooves digging furrows in the sand, neck arched and ears pinned flat. He looked every inch the wild thing he was, but there was something else in his eyes, something pleading. He didn't run, he didn't attack, he just waited. Grace inched forward, careful not to spook him. She knelt and held out her hands. "I'm not here to hurt him. You're not alone, big guy. Let me see him." As if he understood, the Mustang shifted aside, blocking her from the steepest drop, but leaving just enough room for her to slide past. That's when she saw the boy. Liam lay crumpled in the dust, his face pale and streaked with blood, his right leg twisted at an ugly angle. 2 angry puncture marks on his calf were already swelling. Snakebite. Grace's gut clenched. She'd seen it before, and she knew how little time she had. "Hey, sweetheart, stay with me," she murmured, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. A faint pulse, but thready. She looked up at the Mustang, who snorted and stomped again, as if urging her to hurry. Grace fumbled for her phone, dialing Hope Hollow. Eleanor answered on the first ring. "I need the kit and the truck at the lower ravine. Bring saline, EPI, and the stretcher. I've got a snakebite victim, a boy. And Eleanor, there's a Mustang down here who's not letting anyone near him except me." Eleanor's voice was pure steel. "Hang on, I'm coming." Minutes later, though it felt like hours, Eleanor arrived in a cloud of dust, her silver hair wild, eyes narrowed and focused. She leapt from the truck, hauling a battered trauma bag. She didn't flinch at the sight of the Mustang. She'd seen stranger things at Grace's side. She just nodded, knelt by Liam, and started working. "Vitals?" Eleanor barked, already fitting a tourniquet. "Weak but there," Grace replied, pulling supplies from the bag. As Eleanor cleaned the wound and started a saline IV, Grace spoke quietly to Liam, holding his hand. "You're safe now. We're going to take you home." Liam's eyelids fluttered. "Storm," he whispered. Grace glanced at the Mustang, standing sentinel over them, and nodded. "He's right here." With practiced teamwork, they eased Liam onto the stretcher. Storm snorted, stomping the ground, muscles bunching. Grace met the horse's gaze, holding it for a long, silent moment. "You coming?" Storm hesitated, pawed the ground, then followed as they carried Liam to the truck. He didn't have a halter or lead. He didn't need one. He walked like he'd made up his mind that wherever this boy went, he would go too. Back at Hope Hollow, the world spun into action. Eleanor guided the gurney into the Animal Therapy Center's guest cabin, a cozy, sunlit room that usually hosted troubled teens or battered foals. Liam drifted in and out of consciousness as Eleanor administered anti-venom, her hands sure and gentle. Grace watched from the doorway, awed by Storm's refusal to leave. The horse stood outside the cabin, head low, amber eyes never straying from the boy. He whinnied when they shut the door, then settled on the porch like a living guardian. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in over the desert. Rain lashed the tin roof, thunder shook the windows. Eleanor read quietly at Liam's bedside, while Grace moved from barn to barn, checking on the animals. Each time she passed the window, she saw Storm, soaked, unmoving, patient as stone. At midnight, Liam stirred. His fever broke, his breathing eased. He opened his eyes, blinking at the dim lamplight, and turned his head toward the window. Storm stood outside, barely visible in the flickering lightning. Liam's lips moved, barely a whisper. "You came back." Grace, standing just outside the room, heard it through the door. She pressed a hand to her chest, fighting tears she couldn't explain. Dawn crept in, soft and pink. Liam slept, dreamless for the first time in years. Storm remained at his post, mane gleaming with rain and resolve. Hope Hollow was quiet, but something had changed. Something had found its way home. The days after Liam's rescue passed in a blur, a patchwork of pain, drifting sunlight, and voices that faded in and out. At Hope Hollow, time moved differently. Instead of the anxious silence of Vera's house, there was the gentle cadence of life on the ranch. The distant clatter of hooves, the call of birds at sunrise, the murmur of wind in the cottonwoods. Liam's world shrank to the small guest room and the view from its porch. His leg ached, heavy and stiff in its splint. The snakebite wound pulsed and itched, but Eleanor, calm and efficient, changed the bandages every morning, checking for infection and gently teasing him to drink more water. He tried to respond, but words felt useless and heavy. Each time he tried to speak, his throat closed around the memory of Vera's eyes as she'd pushed him. Cold, unblinking, empty of love. Grace respected his silence. She was always nearby, but never hovering. In the afternoons, she'd settle on the porch steps, whittling wood or humming old cowboy songs under her breath. She spoke to the animals with a quiet authority that even the most stubborn stallion seemed to respect. "You can take your time here," she told Liam once, not looking at him, just tossing crumbs to a pair of doves. "Folks heal at their own pace, son. We won't rush you." But it was Storm who watched him most closely. The wild Mustang refused to leave the ranch, keeping within sight of Liam's window from dawn until the sky turned violet with dusk. Sometimes Liam would wake to find the horse's shadow pressed against the glass, the white mane catching the first rays of morning. Other times, Storm would be waiting at the porch, silent and still, as if standing guard. One late afternoon, as cicadas buzzed in the trees and the ranch dogs sprawled in the shade, Liam finally inched outside. His crutches felt awkward, his leg throbbing with each step, but the fresh air and open sky called to him in a way nothing had in months. He eased himself onto the porch swing, closing his eyes to the sun's warmth. A quiet snort startled him. Storm stood at the paddock fence, no more than 20 feet away, his gaze fixed on Liam. There was no threat in the horse's eyes, just patient curiosity, like he was waiting for a sign. Liam sat there, uncertain, the silence stretching between them. He remembered stories from his dad, tales about how some animals just knew when someone was hurting. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, but Storm's steady presence brought a strange comfort. Days slipped by in gentle repetition. Each morning, Eleanor checked his wound, declaring with pride when the swelling receded and color returned to Liam's cheeks. Grace gave him small chores, folding towels, filling feed buckets, things he could do sitting down. At first, Liam worked in silence, flinching at every sudden sound, but gradually the rhythm of ranch life eased the constant coil of anxiety in his chest. One morning, as fog rolled off the fields and dew sparkled on the grass, Grace appeared at the door with a battered grooming kit. "I could use an extra pair of hands," she said, placing it beside him. "Storm's mane is a mess. Think you can help?" Liam hesitated. I don't know how." Grace just grinned. You'll learn. Horses appreciate good company more than perfect technique. Together they approached Storm, who stood waiting by the paddock gate. Grace offered a sugar cube from her palm, then motioned for Liam to do the same. His hand shook, but Storm took the treat gently, breath tickling his fingers. With slow, careful movements, Liam worked the brush through Storm's tangled mane. The horse closed his eyes, sighing with obvious pleasure. Grace taught him to watch Storm's breathing, to match his own breath to the rise and fall of the horse's sides, a trick she used with her therapy clients. Breathe in slow, son. Feel it in your ribs, let it out easy. Again. Liam closed his eyes, following her lead. Something loosened in his chest. The Mustang's steady presence seemed to quiet the noise in his head, drowning out Vera's lies, the panic, the self-doubt. Day by day, their bond deepened. After that morning, Storm began to seek him out, nudging Liam's shoulder with his muzzle or waiting patiently while he practiced walking a little farther with his crutches. Liam started talking again. Not much at first. A few words, then a sentence, then a story about his dad teaching him how to skip stones across the creek. Storm listened, ears flicking as if he understood every word. One evening, after chores, Eleanor watched the pair from the kitchen window. "That horse is doing what no medication ever could," she said softly to Grace. "He's healing the boy from the inside out." Grace nodded, her voice full of quiet wonder. "I've seen horses save soldiers from nightmares, kids from grief, old folks from loneliness. But I've never seen a bond form this fast." Some days, the shadows would return. Liam would flinch at a slammed door or freeze at the sound of tires crunching the gravel drive. But Storm was always there, grounding him. When panic threatened, Grace showed him more breathing exercises. 4 in, 6 out. Match Storm's breath. You're safe. You're here. And for the first time in a long while, Liam believed her. As summer deepened, the porch became Liam's sanctuary. He spent hours sketching the horses, sometimes humming the old country songs his dad loved. Storm kept him company, dozing in the sun or trotting beside him as he learned to hobble along the fence line. One afternoon, as thunder rumbled on the horizon, Storm bowed his head, pressing his nose to Liam's chest. The boy wrapped his arms around the horse's neck and, without meaning to, let the tears come. Hot, silent, unashamed. No one spoke about the day Vera abandoned him, or the pain he carried. No one needed to. The ranch, the people, the animals, they all gave him the space and time to heal at his own pace. In those quiet moments, as dusk painted the sky with lavender and gold, Liam found something he'd forgotten he was missing, a sense of belonging, a flicker of hope. And though he couldn't quite say it out loud, he knew deep down, Storm had saved his life in more ways than one. Summer on the ranch crept in with gentle days, golden light, and the soft hush of evening winds. Liam settled into life at Hope Hollow, the ranch's routines growing familiar, almost comforting. Each day, he grew a little stronger. The splint came off his leg at last, leaving behind a thin scar and a cautious limp. He could walk the length of the porch now, then halfway down the paddock fence before Storm would meet him with a whinny, circling as if to say, "You're late." In many ways, Hope Hollow became a home for Liam in the way no place had since his father died. Grace had a knack for knowing when to give space and when to nudge, while Eleanor brought a quiet warmth and a steady presence. No one asked for explanations. No one demanded he be happy. They just included him, at meals, at chores, in stories told around the dinner table. If Liam was silent, they filled the gap with their own laughter. If he spoke, they listened. He started to open up, first in small, shy fragments. One evening, As they raked hay in the barn, Liam found himself speaking, almost against his will. My dad used to take me hiking in Red Rock Park. We'd see wild horses sometimes. He said they belonged to nobody but themselves. Grace leaned her rake against a stall, considering. That's true, you know. Wild horses don't owe anyone anything, but sometimes they choose to stay. That means more than any rope or fence ever could. Liam nodded, watching Storm chase a butterfly across the field. My stepmom, she wasn't always so bad. But after my dad, I guess she needed someone to blame. Grace didn't interrupt, just worked beside him in the dim barn light. Liam went on, voice low. Nobody believed me when I said she'd lose her temper. Not teachers, not social workers. She could be charming when she wanted. Eleanor, passing with a tray of fresh hay, paused and squeezed Liam's shoulder. You're safe here, and we believe you. For a while, the pain eased. But trauma is a tricky thing. It doesn't vanish just because you want it to. Both Liam and Storm carried invisible scars. Storm flinched at sudden sounds, his muscles tensing at every shout or clang. Liam, too, found his heart racing at small, unexpected triggers, the slam of a gate, the ring of the landline, even the sizzle of bacon on the skillet some mornings. One sweltering July night, a thunderstorm swept across the desert. The clouds turned the horizon black, lightning forked the sky, and thunder rolled so loud it shook the windows. Grace and Eleanor hustled the animals into the barn, shouting to be heard over the wind. Liam froze in the hallway, panic squeezing his chest. He remembered another storm, years ago, when his dad was still alive, sheltering together under a thin tarp in the woods. Now, the shadows twisted on the walls, every flash and bang a reminder of how quickly safety could be ripped away. A desperate whinny jolted him back. Storm was loose, bolting across the paddock in terror, heading for the open barn. Without thinking, Liam ran into the rain, feet slipping in the mud. He found Storm in the far stall, wild-eyed and trembling, sweat darkening his white coat. Liam didn't hesitate. He climbed into the stall, closed the gate behind him, and slid down the wall to the straw. He didn't try to touch Storm. He just sat, drawing slow, shaking breaths, echoing the techniques Grace had taught him. 4 in, 6 out. You're okay. I'm okay. Minutes passed. Storm circled, nostrils flaring, muscles tight. Gradually, the horse's breathing matched Liam's, their exhales sinking in the darkness. Lightning crackled, but Liam didn't flinch. Not anymore. He reached out, palm up, and Storm lowered his head, resting his heavy jaw in Liam's lap. The warmth and weight of that simple contact anchored them both. Somewhere outside, the rain softened, the thunder faded, and Hope Hollow's lights flickered warm and steady against the gloom. Grace found them at dawn, curled together in the hay, both asleep. She stood quietly at the stall door for a long time before turning away, her heart aching and full. Later, she whispered to Eleanor, "They're the same, those two, both fighting to stay standing no matter what." But trust was a slow-growing thing. Liam's old habits crept back at unexpected moments. He'd still jump at an unfamiliar voice or shrink from praise. Grace never pushed, simply met each setback with calm, never treating him like he was fragile or broken. Sometimes at night, Eleanor would find Liam sitting on the porch, knees tucked to his chest, staring at the stars. Storm would stand behind him, silent and protective. Liam rarely spoke during these times, but Eleanor knew better than to press. Healing, she'd learned, is a patient process, like waiting for wildflowers to bloom in hard desert soil. With time, Liam began to find joy in the little things. He learned how to mend a bridle, how to check a horse's hooves, how to cook Eleanor's cornbread without burning it. Storm became his shadow, following him from barn to field, from riverbank to porch. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the mesas, Liam took his first slow steps without crutches. Storm matched his pace, head low, as if aware of every ounce of pain and pride. Grace cheered from the paddock, and even Eleanor wiped a tear from her eye. For the first time in years, Liam let himself hope. Not everything was perfect. Memories still stung, and storms still made him shiver. But at Hope Hollow, he was no longer alone. He and Storm were learning together that surviving isn't the same as living, and that sometimes the hardest part of healing is letting yourself feel safe again. For weeks, the world at Hope Hollow seemed almost suspended in a gentle peace. Liam's limp faded. His laughter grew more frequent, and even the ranch's toughest rescue horses relaxed under his touch. Grace and Eleanor watched him with a quiet pride, marveling at how Storm and the boy seemed to draw strength from each other. But peace, Liam learned, is a fragile thing. Some shadows stretch longer than expected, and the past, once ignored, has a habit of finding its way home. It began one sticky August afternoon. The air shimmered with heat, cicadas buzzing in the cottonwoods. Grace was teaching Liam how to tack up a nervous filly in the shade when the distant growl of an unfamiliar car floated down the drive. It was a sharp, expensive sound, wrong among the battered pickups and dusty horse trailers. Storm's ears flicked back. Even the filly jerked her head, wide-eyed. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, frowning. She'd grown used to the slow, steady rhythm of ranch life, but she could read tension in the way Liam's hand tightened on the lead rope. The car, a shiny black SUV, clean as the day it left the lot, rolled to a stop by the main gate. Its windows were tinted, reflecting the big sky and hiding the driver's eyes. The door opened. High heels clicked on the gravel. Liam's blood ran cold. Vera stood there, somehow both out of place and perfectly composed. Her hair was pinned into a flawless twist, her lips painted a harsh red. Beside her, a tall man in a dark suit, her lawyer by the look of his briefcase and practiced scowl, surveyed the ranch with barely concealed distaste. For a moment, no one moved. Then Vera smiled, all sugar and teeth. "Well, there you are, Liam. I've come to bring you home. You must be so relieved." Liam took a step back, the lead rope slipping through his fingers. He could barely breathe. Storm moved instantly to his side, ears flattened, muscles tense. Grace strode up, arms crossed and voice cool as creek water. "You're trespassing. If you have business, you'll state it here. Otherwise, I'll call the sheriff." Vera turned her gaze on Grace, the smile tightening. "No need for dramatics. I'm here to rescue my poor stepson. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I have legal custody, and my lawyer will be contacting Child Protective Services." The lawyer cleared his throat. "We request that Liam be returned to his legal guardian immediately. Any refusal may be considered kidnapping." Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to speak, but the words caught. Eleanor came to stand beside him, her hand gentle on his shoulder. Storm let out a low, warning rumble. Grace was unflinching. "We're not handing over a traumatized minor to anyone without a court order. Until then, you're free to wait outside our gates, or with the sheriff." Vera's face twisted, just for a second. "You people don't know what you're getting into," she hissed under her breath. Then, instantly, her mask returned. "We'll see what the courts say." She and her lawyer retreated to the car, slamming the doors hard enough to make the filly rear. Storm stamped the ground, tossing his head. For the next few days, the ranch was tense. Vera's threats were not empty. The lawyer called twice, emails poured in, and one afternoon a strange man snapped pictures from across the road. Grace remained calm, keeping her phone charged and her legal papers close. Eleanor doubled security, sleeping with her cell phone by the bed. Liam spent more time with Storm, haunted by the idea that Vera could rip him away at any moment. One evening, after a dinner of chili and cornbread, Grace found Liam alone in the tack room, sitting in the dark, fingers twisting a leather strap. "I don't want to go back," he whispered, voice small. "She'll hurt me again, or worse." Grace sat beside him, her presence solid and grounding. "We're not going to let that happen. But Liam, the courts care about proof. Is there anything at all you can remember? Something we can use?" Liam stared at the floor, mind racing. Then, suddenly, a memory surfaced. Vera rehearsing her story over and over, recording herself on her phone before social workers' visits. "She used a voice note app," he said slowly, hope flickering. "She used to talk to herself, practicing her lies. Maybe there's something on her phone." Grace's eyes sharpened. "Did you ever see where she kept her phone?" "She always had a backup, one she thought I didn't know about. She kept it hidden in her purse, synced to her iCloud, always locked up tight except when she was alone in the car." They hatched a desperate plan. The next day, as Vera's car returned for another visit, Grace distracted her at the front gate, insisting she show legal paperwork, peppering her with questions. Meanwhile, Liam slipped unnoticed to the SUV, heart hammering, and rummaged through Vera's purse until he found the spare phone. His hands shook as he unlocked it. To his surprise, the screen was already open to the voice note app. As he scrolled, a recent file caught his eye, time-stamped the morning of his birthday. He played it, barely breathing. Vera's voice, low and venomous, spilled out. "He's too soft. He should have died in that ravine. Maybe next time I'll be so lucky." Liam copied the file to his email, snapped photos of other damning messages, and quickly returned the phone before slipping away. Grace took the evidence straight to the sheriff, her jaw set with grim determination. Within hours, officers were at Hope Hollow, taking statements and securing the recording. When Vera came storming up the driveway the next day, she found the sheriff and 2 deputies waiting. Her outrage turned to panic as they played her own words back to her. Liam watched from the porch, Storm standing at his side, both of them trembling, not with fear, but with relief. For the first time, the adults believed him. As Vera was led away, her mask shattered. She spat over her shoulder. "This isn't over, Liam. You'll regret this." But Liam didn't flinch. He gripped Storm's mane and lifted his chin, standing taller than he ever had before. That night, the ranch felt lighter. The sky stretched clear and full of stars, the threat finally named, the nightmare finally exposed. Hope Hollow wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a fortress, and Liam knew, deep in his bones, that family was the people who refused to leave when things got hard. But as Grace double-checked the locks and Eleanor stoked the fire, no one noticed the flicker of headlights in the far distance, or the shadow that lingered a little too long at the edge of the property. Some threats, Liam was about to learn, do not go quietly into the night. The news spread through the quiet New Mexico town faster than a summer storm. Vera had been arrested. Whispers filled the diner, the hardware store, even the school bus stops. Some folks were shocked. Others just nodded, remembering the coldness in Vera's eyes or the way she spoke to Liam in town. But nobody could remember anything quite like this. a child testifying against the person who was supposed to protect him. At Hope Hollow, the days leading up to the hearing were tense and full of preparation. The sheriff called often, explaining what Liam should expect. Grace coached him gently through possible questions. Eleanor made sure Liam ate, even when his nerves had him picking at his food, and Storm, always Storm, remained an unwavering presence outside the cabin window, or just behind him in the yard, as if promising, in his silent way, that he wasn't alone. The courthouse was an old adobe building at the heart of town, its whitewashed walls and wooden benches worn smooth by decades of lives intersecting and fates decided. On the morning of the hearing, Hope Hollow's family rose before dawn. Grace found Liam staring out at the rising sun, knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the porch. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," Grace said softly. Liam nodded, his voice rough. "I know, but I need to. For me, for Storm, for all the kids who don't get heard." The drive into town felt endless. The sky was wide and cloudless, but Liam's stomach was a knot. Storm had been loaded into the trailer, not because he could enter the courthouse, but because Grace knew the boy would need to see his friend, even from a distance. At every red light, Storm snorted and stomped, restless, refusing to be left behind. The courthouse steps were crowded. Lawyers, social workers, the sheriff, a couple of local reporters, and neighbors with curious eyes. Liam shrank under the attention, but Grace, Eleanor, and Storm's presence steadied him. As they waited to be called, Liam looked through a high window. Out back, in a small grassy lot, Storm stood tall, visible even from the courtroom. The horse's white coat gleamed in the sunlight, mane tossing in the breeze. Their eyes met. Liam took a deep breath. Inside, the courtroom was hushed but tense. Vera sat at the defense table, flanked by her lawyer. Her face was hard, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. When she looked at Liam, he felt a cold chill, but he didn't look away. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness, called the room to order. The hearing began with evidence: the voice recording, Liam's hospital records, reports from the sheriff and Eleanor. Vera's lawyer objected and postured, but the evidence was damning. When the voice note played for the court, Vera muttering, "He should have died in that ravine." Even the deputies at the back exchanged glances of shock. Then it was Liam's turn. His knees shook as he walked to the witness stand, but Grace caught his eye and nodded encouragement. The judge smiled gently as he was sworn in. The lawyer's questions were sharp and quick. "Liam, why are you making these accusations against your stepmother?" Liam swallowed, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Because they're true." He told his story: the birthday trip, the push at the canyon's edge, the pain, the snake bite, the way Vera's car disappeared into the heat haze, leaving him to die. He spoke softly but clearly, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. He described waking up to Storm standing over him, the horse's protection, the way Grace and Eleanor had brought him to safety. Vera's lawyer tried to twist his words. "Are you sure you didn't just fall? Is it possible you're confused?" Liam met his gaze. "No, I remember. She pushed me. She told me to grab something, then shoved me down the slope." He looked at the judge, then at the window where Storm stood outside, visible even from the stand. Family isn't just blood. Family is who doesn't leave you when you're hurting. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. Then Vera was called to testify. She tried to cry, describing herself as a devoted stepmother, a victim of a rebellious child. She claimed the recording was taken out of context, that she was simply venting frustration after a stressful day. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Your own words are clear," she said. "You wished harm upon a child under your care." Finally, it was time for closing arguments. The prosecutor spoke of duty, care, and the meaning of family. "Liam's testimony," he said, "proved more courage than most adults could muster." Vera's lawyer tried one last time. "My client was under stress, grieving the loss of her husband. Liam was difficult, even dangerous. She never intended him harm." But the truth was out. The judge's ruling was swift and unambiguous. Vera was stripped of all custody and visitation rights. The court found her guilty of endangering the welfare of a child, and with the voice recording as evidence, she was formally charged with attempted murder. The sheriff stepped forward and led her out in handcuffs, her mask of calm replaced by shock and rage. Liam watched as she was taken away. For a moment his vision blurred, not with fear, but with a strange, dizzying relief. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been crazy. His story mattered. The townspeople, many of whom had doubted him, now watched in silence as he stepped out of the courtroom. Storm was waiting, just beyond the doors, head high, amber eyes fixed on Liam. As the boy walked up, Storm nickered softly and nudged his shoulder. Grace and Eleanor came to his side, wrapping him in a fierce, proud hug. "You did it," Eleanor whispered. "You stood up for yourself. No one can take that away." Liam pressed his face to Storm's mane, the horse's warmth anchoring him. Reporters wanted interviews, but Grace waved them off. "Let the boy breathe," she said, leading the small family away from the crowd. Outside, the sky was impossibly blue. Storm pranced beside Liam, mirroring his every step. Liam realized he felt lighter than he had in years, not just free from Vera's shadow, but free to belong, to trust, to hope. That night at Hope Hollow, the stars seemed to shine brighter. Over supper, Grace raised a glass of lemonade in a toast. To courage, to truth, to family, chosen and earned. Liam grinned, and even Storm seemed to nod, as if he too understood what it meant to finally be heard. But as the night fell silent, a new question settled into Liam's heart. What would it mean to truly stay? To let himself be loved, not just rescued? Hope Hollow had given him a second chance. Now, for the first time, Liam wondered if he could finally choose it for himself. After the courtroom victory, Hope Hollow felt more alive than ever. There was laughter at breakfast, music in the kitchen, and the deep, steady peace that came with knowing Vera could never touch Liam again. Grace took on new rescue cases. Eleanor helped local foster kids adjust to life at the ranch, and Liam found himself, day by day, leaning into the warmth of belonging. Still, some scars healed in silence. Liam sometimes woke at night, heart racing, the ghost of Vera's threats echoing in his ears. He'd press his cheek to Storm's mane and remind himself, she was gone. He was safe. The family he'd found here wouldn't leave him behind. Summer ripened, days stretching long and golden, until August deepened into a season of wild heat and restless air. One evening, the sky glowed bruised purple at the horizon. After a lively dinner, Grace checked the weather, worried about a sudden spike in wind. "Let's make sure everything's locked up tight," she told Eleanor and Liam, "just in case." They moved from barn to paddock, double-checking latches, stowing hay, and settling horses. Storm stayed glued to Liam's side, unusually watchful, ears pricked, as if he sensed something neither boy nor adults could. As dusk melted into a black velvet night, the ranch lights flickered, and the only sounds were crickets and the low huff of horses at rest. Liam was brushing Storm in the open barn doorway when it happened. A strange chemical tang drifted on the breeze, a harsh smell, out of place among the scents of hay and leather. Before Liam could call out, a distant crack sounded, then a hiss, and a burst of unnatural orange light flared up behind the old hay barn. "Fire!" Grace's shout split the darkness. Panic swept the ranch. Eleanor ran for the hose and fire extinguishers, while Grace sprinted to open the corral gates and lead the most panicked horses to safety. The flames devoured the barn wall in seconds, feeding on dry wood and hay, leaping hungrily skyward. Wind whipped embers across the yard, and the world was suddenly chaos. Shouting, sirens in the far distance, the wild whinnies of frightened animals. Liam froze for a split second, heart pounding, smoke burning his lungs. Somewhere inside the barn, Grace's voice rang out. She was trapped behind a wall of thick black smoke, cut off from the main door. Storm whinnied, high and wild, pawing the ground in agitation. He looked at Liam, then toward the back of the burning barn, a service door partially hidden behind a stack of barrels. Without thinking, Liam leapt onto Storm's back, bareback and barefoot, trusting the horse's instinct more than his own. "Go!" Liam urged. Storm surged forward, nostrils flaring as smoke swirled around them. The world narrowed to heat and fear and the pounding of Storm's hooves on dry earth. They circled wide around the barn, where the flames hadn't yet taken hold, and reached the back door. Liam slid down and yanked at the door, coughing, eyes stinging. He could barely see, but he heard Grace calling from inside, her voice hoarse. "I'm here! The smoke! Help!" Storm, wild-eyed but steady, thrust his head into the narrow opening, snorting and stomping. Liam forced the door open wider, and through the rolling smoke, glimpsed Grace slumped near a feed bin, her arm over her mouth. "Come on, Grace!" Liam called, voice cracking. He scrambled in, wrapping his shirt around his nose. Storm pressed inside after him, a white shadow in the darkness. Liam grabbed Grace's arm, guiding her toward the door. She stumbled, coughing, her legs weak. Storm took the lead, blasting a path through overturned buckets and broken boards, neighing with such urgency that Grace forced herself to follow. Together, with Storm's bulk shielding them from falling debris, they made it out, collapsing into the cool night air. For a moment, the world spun in silence. Just the roar of the fire, the flashing of emergency lights now approaching from the main road. Eleanor rushed to them, tears streaking her soot-stained face. She gathered them close, then helped Grace sit while Liam leaned, shaking against Storm's neck. Firefighters stormed in, working quickly to contain the blaze. A few horses, spooked but unharmed, galloped to the far end of the pasture, while neighbors began to arrive, offering hands and water and comfort. The fire, though fierce, was eventually beaten back. Thanks, everyone agreed, to the courage of a wild Mustang and a boy who refused to abandon his family. But as the smoke cleared and the sun rose pink over the battered barn, the sheriff made a grim discovery. This wasn't an accident, he told Grace and Eleanor, holding out a melted canister with the label half burned away. Accelerant, someone set this. Liam felt his chest tighten. The memory of headlights in the distance, the shadow at the edge of the property, snapped into focus. Grace's jaw clenched. "Vera." The sheriff nodded. "We traced phone records. Looks like she made a few calls from jail she wasn't supposed to. Hired someone to finish what she started. But she's not getting away with it. The arson charges will be added to her sentence." Liam watched the sunrise with Storm, his hands buried in the horse's mane. He realized with a shiver just how close he'd come to losing everything again. But he also saw, clear as day, what true family meant. Not just the people who rescued you once, but those who fought over and over to keep you safe. That afternoon, the whole ranch gathered to assess the damage. The barn was blackened, half collapsed, but the animals were alive, and everyone, people and horses, were safe. As they stood together, Eleanor rested a hand on Liam's shoulder. "You two were heroes tonight," she whispered, voice thick with pride. "Both of you." Liam looked at Storm, the wild Mustang who had never left his side, and nodded. He knew in his heart that whatever came next, they would face it together. And as night settled once more over Hope Hollow, Liam understood. Sometimes, when the world tries to burn you down, it's the family you choose and the wild courage in your chest that helps you rise from the ashes. The weeks after the fire brought a different kind of work to Hope Hollow. The old hay barn was half-gutted, its charred skeleton a stark reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But as the ashes settled, so did the community. Neighbors brought lumber and tools. Teens from the local school offered to muck stalls, and Grace's old army buddies showed up in battered pickups with strong arms and ready smiles. What could have been the end of Hope Hollow became instead its second beginning. Liam woke every day to the sounds of hammers, laughter, and the soft whinnies of horses greeting the dawn. He joined in wherever he could, hauling feed, picking nails out of salvageable boards, learning how to use a circular saw under Eleanor's watchful eye. His hands grew calloused, and his shoulders, once hunched in fear, squared with pride. Every night, when the work crews left and the ranch was quiet, he'd sit with Storm at the edge of the ridge, watching the sky deepen from gold to indigo, and feel something he hadn't felt since he was a child: belonging. The fire investigation wrapped up quickly. The evidence against Vera was overwhelming. She'd been careless with her calls, arrogant enough to believe no one would dig deeper. When the arson for hire plot became public, the judge added years to her sentence. The sheriff made it a point to stop by the ranch every week, making sure Liam and the family felt safe. Vera would not be coming back. Not now, not ever. For the first time, Liam was able to breathe easy. There were still nightmares, but they faded with every sunrise. Storm slept outside his window, sometimes nickering in his dreams. The wild Mustang's presence was a promise. "I'm still here. I'm not leaving." One cool evening, Grace and Eleanor called Liam to the porch. They sat together under the porch light, Grace's arm slung over Eleanor's shoulders, a thick manila envelope resting on the table between them. Liam felt his heart start to race. Grace cleared her throat. "Liam, you know you don't ever have to leave if you don't want to. Hope Hollow isn't just a place for broken horses or kids in trouble. It's our home. And we want it to be yours, too." Eleanor slid the envelope across the table. "We'd like to adopt you, officially, only if you want it." For a long moment, the world went quiet except for the night bugs and Storm's distant nicker. Liam's throat tightened. He'd never let himself hope for this, not truly. He looked at their faces, soft with kindness, shining with pride, and felt the old walls inside him crumble. He nodded, unable to speak. Grace reached across and pulled him into a hug. "You're ours now, kid, and we're yours." The next weeks became a whirlwind of paperwork and meetings, but this time Liam wasn't afraid. The judge presiding over the adoption smiled as she signed the final order, then ruffled Liam's hair and declared, "I expect you'll keep this family busy for years to come." Even Storm seemed to sense the change, galloping the fence line with an energy that made the neighbors laugh. With his adoption final, Liam chose a new middle name, Shemps, after his father. He wore his dad's old watch to the ceremony, and Grace slipped a turquoise bracelet onto his wrist, a token of their family, old and new. Hope Hollow, too, changed with the seasons, With support from the town and a flood of online donations after their story made the news, the ranch not only rebuilt the barn, but expanded its mission. Grace and Eleanor launched new therapy programs for teens with PTSD, foster kids who needed a place to land, and veterans struggling to find their footing. Storm became a certified emotional therapy horse, his reputation spreading far beyond the county. Local reporters called him a legend. Children who arrived at the ranch nervous and angry found themselves drawn to him, brushing his coat, learning to ride, sharing secrets in his steady, listening presence. Liam grew into his role as a mentor and helper. He led trail rides, shared chores with the younger kids, and even spoke to groups about his journey. The first time he stood in front of a circle of foster kids, some wary, some lost, he told the story of the canyon, the white horse, and the family that didn't give up on him. "You don't have to be blood to be family," Liam said, voice steady. "Sometimes the people who show up for you are the ones who choose you. That's what matters." Storm stood behind him, watching, a living monument to second chances. One afternoon, when the worst of the summer heat had faded, Liam climbed onto Storm's back, bareback, reins loose, arms stretched wide. They galloped across the ridge, wind tugging at Liam's hair, Storm's hooves thundering over the red earth. In that wild, free moment, Liam felt weightless, his laughter echoing over the land. Grace and Eleanor waved from below, their faces shining with pride. Evenings at Hope Hollow became a patchwork of small joys. S'mores roasted over a new fire pit, guitars strumming on the porch, children's voices drifting across the fields. Liam learned to play chess with Eleanor, cooked biscuits with Grace, and taught the newest arrivals how to braid Storm's mane. He planted sunflowers at the barn's edge. For luck, he told everyone, though he suspected luck had already found him. Storm's legend grew. On Saturdays, families from the town brought their kids to see the miracle Mustang, and Liam told them with a grin, "He's not a miracle. He's just loyal. He chooses who to trust." Hope Hollow had once been a refuge for the broken, a stopover for the lost. Now it was a place where people stayed, put down roots, and grew strong together. Liam found himself, at last, not just living, but thriving, nourished by the love that surrounded him, anchored by the trust of a horse who'd chosen him on the edge of a canyon. As autumn crept in and the desert light softened, Liam stood at the ridge with Storm and looked out over the ranch, the rebuilt barn, the new paddocks, the laughter drifting from the main house. He understood, deep in his bones, that home wasn't just where you were safe. It was where you were wanted, chosen, and loved. Hope Hollow had become that place, not just for him, but for every soul who crossed its gates. The months after the adoption felt like an unfolding sunrise in Liam's life. Autumn colored the desert with gold and scarlet, and Hope Hollow settled into a rhythm both ordinary and extraordinary. The barn was rebuilt better than ever. Laughter was as common as horseshoes in the dust, and the scars, both visible and hidden, began to heal for everyone. But Liam had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means growing stronger at the broken places. It was Grace who first suggested that Liam share his story publicly. "People learn best from people who've walked the hard road, Liam. Your courage matters. Your bond with Storm. It's more than just survival. It's hope for a lot of folks." Eleanor agreed. "And you've got a way of talking that makes people listen," she said one evening, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe you should think about the podcast the veterans run in town. Share your story with them, with others." At first, Liam hesitated. The idea of his voice recorded, his memories out in the world for strangers to pick over, made his stomach knot. But Storm, as always, had a way of steadying him. One crisp morning, as they walked together along the ridge, Storm's nose bumped his arm, reminding Liam he wasn't alone. With the wild Mustang at his side, he found the courage to say yes. So one Saturday, with Grace and Eleanor listening nearby and Storm grazing just outside the studio window, Liam sat before a microphone, headphones pressing warm against his ears. The host, a gentleman named Martin who'd found healing at Hope Hollow years ago, welcomed him with kindness. "Today, folks, we have Liam Turner," Martin's voice rolled out, smooth and inviting. "He's going to tell us a story about survival, about family, and about a horse named Storm who saved his life. Liam, the floor is yours." Liam cleared his throat, nerves jangling. But when he started speaking, the words flowed, sometimes halting, sometimes quick, but always honest. He talked about the birthday trip, the push at the canyon's edge, the searing pain, the snake bite, the moment when he thought he was going to die. But mostly he talked about Storm, how the wild Mustang had appeared from the dust, chased off the snake, stood guard over him until help arrived. How, in his darkest hour, it was not a person, but a horse, who refused to abandon him. "People ask me if I think Storm knew what he was doing," Liam said quietly. "If he saved me because I was special. The truth is, I don't think I was. I think I was just someone who needed saving. Storm didn't choose me for any reason except that I was there and he wouldn't walk away. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's loyalty. Maybe it's something we'll never understand." Martin leaned forward. "What do you think makes that kind of loyalty possible?" Liam paused, searching for words that felt true. "I think sometimes what we call instinct is just radical loyalty. Animals like Storm, they don't care about your past. They don't ask for anything except trust. If you give it, they give it back, tenfold." He talked about Grace and Eleanor too, how they'd opened their home and hearts to him, not because they had to, but because they chose to. He described the way healing happened slowly, in the quiet moments, brushing Storm's coat at dawn, learning to bake cornbread with Eleanor, mending fences with Grace, teaching nervous new kids how to breathe beside a horse instead of hiding from the world. "Sometimes the people who stay," Liam said, voice thickening, "don't need to say much. They just show up day after day. They don't fix everything. They just don't give up on you." He could hear Martin nodding. "It sounds like Hope Hollow isn't just a ranch. It's a family." Liam smiled. "That's exactly what it is. It's where you go when you need a place to belong, where you're wanted, not just tolerated, but wanted. That's something I didn't believe existed until I found it here." The podcast episode found listeners far beyond their small New Mexico town. Messages poured in. Foster parents, veterans, teachers, and kids from all over wrote to thank Liam for his honesty and his courage. Some shared their own stories of being rescued by an animal, a mentor, a neighbor who chose to stay. The world, Liam realized, was full of people learning every day that family can be found in the most unexpected places. Liam felt the truth of it most on the ranch. As the fall grew colder and the days shorter, Hope Hollow filled with new arrivals. A teen named Micah, who never spoke above a whisper. A mare named Glory, so jumpy no one but Liam could touch her. A foster girl who cried every night for her lost home until Eleanor soothed her to sleep. Each one carried burdens, scars, stories too heavy to share at first. But Storm, patient and wise, gave them all the same thing he'd given Liam: unconditional presence. Liam became the bridge, teaching new kids to approach Storm, to brush his coat, to talk about their pain if they wanted, or say nothing at all. The language was often silent, but it spoke of trust, patience, and the slow rebuilding of hope. One late afternoon, as Liam led a group ride along the ridge, He looked back at Hope Hollow, the new barn glowing in the golden light, laughter rising from the porch, Storm trotting ahead with Micah clinging to his mane. He realized that the ranch was more than a sanctuary. It was a living lesson, that loyalty, in its truest form, speaks louder than words ever could. That night, as the family gathered around the kitchen table, Grace raised a mug in a quiet toast. To Storm, who taught us what it means to stay. To family chosen and found. And to Liam, for reminding us that courage isn't about never being afraid, but about showing up again and again. Eleanor winked at Liam. "You're a Turner now, through and through." Liam grinned, a little embarrassed but deeply happy. Storm, head poked in through the window, huffed as if in agreement. And as Liam drifted off to sleep that night, he thought of all the people and animals who had shown up for him, and all those he could now show up for in return. He understood, with a clarity born of hardship and hope, that the greatest lesson he'd ever learned was not about surviving, but about belonging. Sometimes loyalty was the only language that mattered, and at Hope Hollow, it was spoken every single day. There was a time Liam never imagined he'd stand in front of a crowd and speak. Yet as autumn tipped into winter and the stars sharpened in the desert sky, he found himself on a makeshift stage beneath strings of lantern lights, looking out at a sea of faces, neighbors, friends, kids from the therapy program, and dozens of strangers drawn to Hope Hollow's annual fundraiser. The new barn, rebuilt and even more beautiful than before, glowed behind him. Tables sagged under trays of cornbread and chili, and laughter rolled across the yard like music. The air buzzed with hope, and at the edge of the crowd, Storm stood tall on the ridge, his white mane shining in the dusk, amber eyes fixed on Liam. Eleanor squeezed Liam's shoulder as she handed him the microphone. "Just speak from your heart, honey. That's always enough." Grace smiled beside her, eyes bright with pride. Liam's palms were sweaty, but his voice was clear. "Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm still not used to standing up here instead of hiding behind a hay bale or a horse's neck. But tonight isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about second chances, and the family we build together." He paused, scanning the faces. His gaze landed on Micah, the quiet teen who'd found his voice at Hope Hollow, on Glory, the once wild mare now letting children braid her mane, on the sheriff, whose steady hand had helped deliver justice, and finally, on Grace and Eleanor, their arms wrapped around each other, the very heart of this place. "I spent a lot of my life thinking I wasn't worth saving," Liam said, his voice shaking only a little. "I believed I was a burden. That family was just something you lost. But then a horse told me otherwise. He found me when I was at my lowest, when I thought nobody cared if I made it out of that canyon alive. He didn't ask if I was good enough or if I deserved to be rescued. He just stood by me, and when I woke up at Hope Hollow, two people who didn't owe me anything chose me anyway." He let the words settle, the silence in the crowd heavy and gentle all at once. "We talk a lot about heroes. When I was a kid, I thought heroes wore capes or badges or had some superpower. But mine had hooves. Two more had tired eyes and open hearts, and none of them ever gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself." Liam's voice grew steadier as he spoke of the lessons he'd learned. The difference between surviving and living, between being tolerated and being wanted. He described the ranch's mission, how Hope Hollow wasn't just a home for lost horses, but a place where wounded people learned to trust again, where anyone, no matter how broken, could belong. He looked toward Storm, now moved closer, standing near the fence where kids and parents gathered to listen. "Storm didn't save me because I was special," He just saw someone who needed him and stayed. That's all it takes sometimes. Showing up for each other again and again, no matter how hard it gets. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and wood smoke. The lanterns swung softly overhead, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. I used to think being strong meant you never needed help. Now I know it means letting people in, letting them love you, even when you're scared. It means choosing to stay every day, even when it would be easier to run. That's what Storm taught me. That's what Grace and Eleanor taught me. That's what I hope we can keep teaching every kid and horse who comes to Hope Hollow. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself, feeling the warmth of all those listening hearts. If you're out there, wondering if you matter, if you're worth fighting for, let me be the one to tell you, you are. You're not alone, even when it feels like it. There's a family for you somewhere, whether it's by blood, by choice, or by pure, stubborn loyalty. Sometimes your hero has hooves. Sometimes your hero is just the person who doesn't walk away. The crowd was silent. Then a wave of applause broke out, honest, unrestrained, a roar of support that made Liam's cheeks burn and his chest swell. Grace and Eleanor caught him in a fierce hug as he stepped down, tears glimmering in their eyes. Micah ran up and threw his arms around him, and even the sheriff grinned, ruffling his hair. Storm, sensing the moment, tossed his mane and trotted down the ridge to join them. The children clustered around him, their laughter echoing into the night. Under the lantern glow, the ranch felt like the center of the universe, a place where hope was not just an idea, but a living, breathing thing. As the evening wore on, the fire pit crackled, s'mores roasted, and voices rose in song. Liam sat beside Storm, watching the flames dance, thinking of how far he'd come, from the canyon's darkness to this field of light. He realized that healing was not a finish line, but a journey, a daily choice to trust, to love, and to let himself be loved in return. Storm nudged his arm, as if agreeing, and together they looked out at the gathering, a patchwork family, messy and miraculous, built not by blood, but by the stubborn, beautiful act of staying. As the fundraiser drew to a close and the crowd drifted home under the starlit sky, Liam spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We made it, didn't we?" Grace, hearing him, nodded. "You did, Liam, and you showed the rest of us how." Eleanor added, "This place wouldn't be what it is without you, without Storm, without every story that found its way here." The wind tugged at Storm's mane. Laughter echoed from the barn. And as Liam watched the Mustang stand tall on the ridge, white against the night, he understood. Some truths are bigger than words, and some families are chosen, not given. Hope Hollow would always be that place, the place where heroes had hooves, and every heart that showed up belonged.